Pastor Robert, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm
Sure.
so honored to have you with me. I know that there are so many amazing things that people want to know about Pastor Robert, but I am very interested in the idea that you have been given this huge vision. I mean, in the year 2000, you were given this big vision for starting a church, and now even fast forward for the Gateway Conference. And somewhere along that line, you had to understand that what God was asking you to do felt probably bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
What would you say to young leaders today who feel like the responsibility they've been given to carry feels overwhelming?
Yeah, I would agree with them.
It's overwhelming.
It is. It is. What God's called all of us to do is bigger than we are. And the problem is that we're going along and we're doing stuff and we feel like I can do this, I can handle this. And then we learn some, we do it a few times. People come up and tell us, man, that was great. You're really gifted at this. You're doing great. And about that time, then God increases it. And so the same thing happened to me. We started the church. I felt good. I got in a flow. I feel good about my messages. I felt good about the staff that God's bringing, and God's doing this. And then it's like, all of a sudden, it was like holding onto a train, and my body looked like a flag just sticking straight out, and Gateway was just going, and people were starting to read my books and things like that, and there were more invitations. And I remember telling the Lord, it's now beyond me. It's too big. That God, this is, what you called me to do up until now, I was okay with, but this is too big for me. And the Lord said to me very clearly, I was in Colorado praying on a mountain, and the Lord said very clearly, son, it's always been too big for you. Even what you thought you could do, I was still doing that too. So I just have to remind myself of that every now and then, that God's the one who does it, and I just have to show up. So we all have big visions because we serve a big God.
That's right.
Everyone does. It's just that there are times when we kind of think we can handle it, and there are times when we think we can't. And the truth of the matter is that without God, we can't do anything, but with God, we can do all things. So we just have to kind of remind ourselves of that.
And we really want to believe that if we just left it up to us, our vision wouldn't be big enough. Right. His is so big. And so it's actually better to choose to do it his way. And I know that you actually speak a lot about hearing and obeying. Can you think of a time in ministry where it was just really difficult because you knew you had heard something from the Lord and you had to obey it, but it could have been the difference in the flesh maybe of thinking, this is too much. I can't actually do what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there have been so many times along the way when they would call me and say, we need to know, we need to make this decision. Do we do this? Do we buy this piece of property or whatever? And, your father-in-law, Pastor Tom Lane, worked with me for many years in that spot. Now your husband, Todd, does. But they each kind of know that my response is going to be, let me pray about it. Let me pray about it. And so every time I would hear something, and it could have been the difference between getting the new property or not getting the new property. It could have been a deal breaker for us many times. But the great thing is when you hear God, then you have the faith to say it and to move forward. And so I look back on it and think, I heard God, so I can move forward. So if we didn't get it, then God protected us. And if we did, then God's going to provide for us.
That's right.
And so there's the protection and the provision. But what I would say is the times when you're worried and you're stressed out about it, it's probably because you don't have a word from God. And when you get that word from God, faith comes by hearing by the word, then you have faith. And we all say, God, I just wish I had more faith to believe for this big vision. Well, you have to have a word from God. That's the key to having faith.
And that's so good because if there ever is an obstacle that you have to overcome, you can always come back to, I had a word. It doesn't mean that maybe everything is always going to look perfect. It allows you to go back to that word and feel so secure. This is what God said, and I didn't know it was going to look like this, but this is what it looked like. So you have a new book coming out called Take the Day Off. And in that book, even related to this, over all of your years of pastoring, I think one of the things that you have really come to believe super strongly, even maybe more so than the beginning, and how I know that is because it's a culture in the organization, and so I benefit from it because my husband is in the organization, a culture of rest at Gateway, and it's actually because you live that in your life. So take the day off is really stemming from that conviction you have about honoring the Sabbath and really giving yourself rest.
Yeah.
So what would you say to pastors who think, well, that's really great for someone who has a great staff to do all this for him? Of course, he can take a day off, but we have a staff of 3. How does he expect me to actually honor the Sabbath in that?
Yeah, well, I'll be really, really blunt with this. The same way what I would expect a guy who has a staff of 3 not to steal, or not to commit adultery,
That's
or
good.
not to murder,
Yeah.
or not to covet, or to not to have any other god before him. It's one of the God's top 10. I mean, he's the one that came up with the top 10 list, way before David Letterman or anyone on TV did. God came up with a top 10 list and put as number 4 to rest one day a week. And I grew up thinking honoring the Sabbath meant go to church. But there's nothing in there about church attendance, although I believe in church attendance.
Sure.
That's not what the Sabbath is. The Sabbath is a day of rest. And God put that in there. So it's a principle like tithing, where people say, well, this guy makes more so he can afford to tithe, but I can't. It's a principle that when we do it
good.
God's way, then God can bless the rest. It's the same way that when we rest one day a week, we can get more done in the 6 days with God's blessing than we can in 7 days without God's blessing. So it's really a principle of trust, whether you have 30 on staff or 3 on staff or 3 volunteers. It's just a matter of trust.
And you even say it is for our benefit.
Yeah.
It's not just because it's what God says to do and so we want to obey, but it actually has a benefit for us.
Yeah, and like one of the benefits that I talk about, I go into a lot more detail in the book than I was able to. I spoke on it at the conference, but I wasn't able to. I just it's the tip of the iceberg, but a lot more benefit, and that is resting your mind. And what happens when you have a restful mind, the creative ideas that you can come up with. And so many church leaders are scrambling to come up with creative or fresh ideas, when if they would just rest their mind, boom, boom, boom. I use an illustration in the book of this very well-known artist that's done lots of album covers for even famous groups that we would know. And he read about, he's not even Jewish, he's not even a believer in Christ that I know of, but he read about the Sabbath, resting every 7th year. So he literally saved in that 6th year to be able to pay his staff to rest for 1 year. And he took a year off, and he and his family went to another country. But all the things he saw during that time became his inspiration for the next 7 years. And he was 21 years into his career at that time, and he realized he was just redoing ideas. Nothing was fresh. Well, he came back and had all these fresh ideas, and now he's done it twice. He's about to do his 3rd one. But what the creativity that he gets from resting during that time is what carries him through that next season.
You have no idea the longevity he's had in that industry might not have ever even happened had he not done it. Maybe the reason why he was able to do that.
A lot of people actually will change careers, or they go through what we call the midlife crisis because they have no creativity left. And yet God implemented a system for us to be able to be refreshed every week.
It's interesting. I wonder if even the burnout in the Christian world that we talk about in ministry and that sort of thing, I wonder if that has a lot to do with it.
I think it is probably the primary reason for burnout and for quitting the ministry is that we just feel like we can't stop. We have to keep going. And what's sad is that as Christians, we know the attributes of God. We're supposed to. We know that God is the sovereign Lord of the universe. We know that He's good. We know that He's faithful. We know that He loves us. We know all that. So why wouldn't we trust Him then that if we'll just rest one day a week, He can take care of it?
It always comes back to just that one little word, trust. There's so much to that. Okay, so just to get a little bit more into the personal life of Pastor Robert and Pastor Debbie, if on these days of rest, what does that look like for you? I know you love going to the ranch. What does it look like for you and Pastor Debbie? Because I know that maybe you both have some differing ideas of what rest would look like. I think hers would be more of a spa day,
Yeah.
and yours might be
She
outdoors.
likes that. So we've got this place in the country, and I had to build a pool because she likes the pool.
Of course.
So yeah.
Yes.
So for me, I can be out on the tractor, and I'm just plowing a field, and I feel like a million miles away from anywhere. And I told one of our pastors one time, who was out there with me one time, and I have a hill, and I was on top of the hill, and I said, when I'm out here, I feel like I'm 100 miles away from everything. And he actually said, you are.
You kind of are. You're out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, but she'll be in the pool, and she's just relaxing, and she's got a magazine or something, and she'll get in for a while. She'll sit by the pool, then she'll sit out, beside it for a while. And so it's just different. The main thing is, and let me go back to that before we had a place of our own, people would loan us places sometimes. There are just things.
Right.
Before that, we would just go to the park sometimes, a public park. Didn't cost anything. We like going to the lake. We have a boat now, but when we were younger, we couldn't afford it.
Right.
But my dad had a boat. And I look back on that, and I think the only reason he had it was for us to borrow it, So God provides. You don't have to be an owner to be able to rest. God provides, and He's provided all of nature. And that's one of the things we like personally about the lake or being out in the country is nature. And God created this beautiful place and these beautiful animals that we can see. And it's just, there's something that relaxes us. And then we both come back refreshed and ready to go.
I love that. I actually read recently that somebody said, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling stressed, go outside, look for 5 things, listen for 4 things, touch 3 things, and then there was something for 2, and then breathe. But I can't remember what the second one was. But really, it was like the idea that we underestimate what God's creation really can, the role it can play in us just renewing our minds and renewing our spirits and just really catching our breath a little bit. And so I love that you do that. And I really do love how different you and Pastor Debbie are in the things you like, but how you have found really great common ground to do that. Let me ask you, as we're wrapping up, just a little other thing. Now, I have an answer that comes to mind because I've heard Pastor Debbie speak about it a few times. But if you had to say a quirk that you have, can you think, what would you let everyone know as a little quirk about Pastor Robert?
Well, what you might be referring to is ketchup.
That's it. I knew you were going to. That's it.
So she says it's in our prenup, but we don't have a prenup. But it's in our prenup that if she ever runs out of ketchup, then
things get bad.
But that's not true. That's not true.
Just grumpy Pastor Robert comes
Debbie,
on.
That's right. Grumpy Pastor Robert. Well, what happens is when I go to the pantry to get the ketchup, there'll be 2 bottles left. That's when I panic. When there are 2 full bottles, because I say I'm taking the last bottle out. There's only 1 bottle left, and she's like, "But there's 1 left, and you have a whole bottle."
One not even open.
And I'm like, "You need to go to the store within the next 20 minutes."
What's a comfortable amount to have for you? A full shelf?
8 to 10.
8 to 10.
Yeah. Here's the
This
reason.
is not even
Because
a joke.
Here's the thing. But I'm this way with just about everything. If I need ketchup and I have 10 bottles, I'm okay. But if I need ketchup and I have no bottles, I'm not okay. So it's okay to have too much, but it's not okay to only have 1 left. And I actually, here's another sad thing. I sometimes take ketchup packages from fast food restaurants and put them in the ketchup so that I have a backup supply.
No.
This is sounding more and
so
more.
I'm just going to point out that we were talking about the 4th commandment. I'm not remembering which one is do not
This is the
steal,
11th.
but
The 11th
that sounds a little bit
commandment
like
is thou
stealing.
shalt not run out of ketchup.
No matter what you have to do
That's
to get it. Well, Pastor Robert, I can't thank you enough for your time. I appreciate all that you do to serve our church and to serve the body of Christ. So thank you for joining me today.